Good morning, ladies and gents that are starting to join. Can I just check the sound? Can you just tell me in the chat if you can hear me, please? Wonderful. Thank you very much, ladies. That's really, really helpful. I'm just going to stay on mute just for another minute and then we are going to get going. Brilliant. Thank you. Nice to see some of you, even if it's just virtually. Good morning. Okay, so some of you know me really well. My name is Mrs. Baker. I'm team leader for history at Shenley Brook End School. There are other history teachers too. I'm not sure if Miss Cordes is here yet. If Miss Cordes is here, she might like to jump on and just say hello.
I am here, yes, sorry. Hello.
Oh, she is. Here we go. Okay, so Miss Cordes is around as well. And we are both likely to be teaching A-level next year. So just to get an idea about who the staff involved are. This morning, this session is going to be really busy. There's loads of information in this session. It's to give you an idea of the course as a whole and to get you ready for studying history in September with us. Okay, so history is really different at different schools because we pick particular specialist options that our staff are specialists in. And so therefore you will get the best kind of quality A-level education from that. So if you're looking at other sixth forms as well, they'll be different in different places. So that's why it might seem like that. So this session's being recorded this morning. You can access the recording later on if you want to. It will be available on the school website, I believe. But if you can stay muted, that would be great. And if you can keep your cameras off, because there's lots of you. I'm just looking at my little list here. There are 42 of you. That's an awful lot. Okay. So there's lots of you. If you keep the camera off, it'll mean that we can keep the session going. And I will ask you at various points to comment in the chat about things so that you can contribute to the session as well. So that would be great. Okay. So if I just get going by looking at the A-level specification at Shenley Brook End. So there are 3 parts to A-level history because we have chosen to study the AQA specification. That means that you will do 2 exams. One will be on the Tudors, and I'll go into more detail on that in a minute. And the other one will be on Russia from 1917 to 1953. Okay. And you will also do 1 piece of coursework. And that piece of coursework is about a 4,000 word essay, which seems a lot now, but won't be a lot when you're writing it, and will be about US civil rights from about 1863 to about 1968. And you'll work on that through year 12 and through year 13. The exam units, you will have a teacher for each one. Okay, so like I said, they're a specialist teacher in that unit, so you get a real in-depth insight into that period of history. And you will do a final exam at the end of year 13. So there are internal exams in between where we're just judging your progress and just seeing how you're doing, but nothing counts until the end of year 13. So this is a true linear A-level. Okay. So if you have any questions while I'm talking, bung them in the chat and I can deal with them while I'm talking, or I can put them in at the end. Okay. So if you've got any questions about anything I say, please just leave it in the chat for me. So if I get going with the Tudors then, what you will see here is that your Tudors course falls into 2 halves. Okay, so AQA call it part 1 and part 2. Okay, you study part 1 in year 12, and part 1 is looking at the years 1485 to 1547, and that basically means you're studying the 2 men at the top there. You're looking at Henry VII and you're looking at Henry VIII. Okay, and you're investigating them thematically, really. You're looking at their government. You're looking at how good a monarch they were. You're looking at the kind of society that they were running. You're looking at things like finance, and you're looking at things like the economy, the way that agriculture was run. You're looking at their foreign policy. Okay, so that's the way that this course works. Okay, so this is far more than Henry VIII and his 6 wives. This is far more than the religious roller coaster, if these are things that are familiar to you from Key Stage 3. Okay, this is much more in depth than that. Part 2 you will do in year 13, and part 2 is called England, Turmoil and Triumph, 1547 to 1603, and this is looking at the reigns of Edward, Mary and Elizabeth. Okay, so Henry VIII's children, and very much looking at the same kind of themes in terms of their rules. Okay, at the end of year 13 you will do a 2-hour 30-minute exam. Okay, that has on it a interpretations question and 2 essays. Okay, and that is how you will be assessed on the Tudors at the end of year 13. Okay, now I want to introduce you to the Tudors a little bit today, and to introduce you to the Tudors we have to work out, that's good, Charlotte, we have to work out why Henry VII got to where he got to. Okay, because Henry VII introduced a new dynasty, a new royal family on the throne, and we have to work out how he was able to become the monarch. Okay, so first of all, this is a bit where you can contribute, ladies and gents. Okay, first of all, what are the kingly duties of a monarch? Now we have Elizabeth II there. You can see her; she is obviously our monarch. Okay, and then you have some Tudor monarchs there. Okay, what would you say are the duties of a monarch? What does a monarch have to do? Can you give me any ideas in the chat? Yeah, good, Alessandra. Absolutely. Keeping the peace. Yeah. So it might be that they have to coordinate foreign relations to do that. Okay. Foreign affairs. Now, obviously, our government would do that today. Our Queen doesn't necessarily do that, although she does intervene, doesn't she? You know, let's have Donald Trump over for tea. Okay. Yes, they have to leave the country, absolutely. Yes, diplomatic relations. Yes, they knight people, absolutely. And if you're from Shenley and you've done the Normans at GCSE, you will understand the concept of the king kind of lending out land to people that are going to help him to rule the country and giving them titles to do that, absolutely. Yes, good. They're going to be religious leaders as well. Very well done. Okay. Yes, they'll be signing off new laws. They'll be more instrumental in making laws probably than Elizabeth II is. Yes, they're military leaders. Good, well done. Okay. Yes, they're in charge of the government. Good. Okay, so you've got lots and lots of ideas there. They are representative of the people. Fantastic. Okay, so loads of ideas about what a monarch has to do. Now, we're just going to think about that term monarchy, and we're going to think about the term kingship. Okay, just in a little bit more detail. Remember, this PowerPoint is in files, okay, on Teams, so you can access it straight after this session if you want to. It will also be uploaded to the website, so don't worry about me going absolutely crazy 19 to the dozen fast, okay? It's just to try and get through lots with you this morning, okay? So a monarchy then is a form of government with a sovereign head of state, okay? And when we talk about something being sovereign, that means the power lies there, okay? So the power in the country lies with the king or the queen. And kingship is the position, power, and authority of a king or queen. Okay, we do have Tudor queens as well. The skill and the aptitude they have for kingly duties. Okay, so that means that monarchy never really changed as a concept. Okay, the monarch is always the sovereign head of state, but a style of kingship could change, okay, or the ability to be the king and do your job well could change depending on who the king was or what context the king was operating in. Okay, now at the in the time of the Tudors, and in fact now it's just not very fashionable to say it, kings are appointed by God. That's what they truly believe. That's something called the divine right of kings. Okay. And at the coronation, and this happened with our Queen, and this will happen with King Charles III when he becomes king, they are anointed with holy oil at their coronation. Okay, so there is that belief still that God appoints kings. Okay, Therefore, if you are going to overthrow, or we're going to use the word usurp, that just means overthrow them, that means you're committing a sin because it breaks something called the great chain of being. Okay, so let's have a look at the great chain of being. Okay, so if you just have a look at that diagram there, okay, it tells you on the slide there that 15th century Europeans were Catholic. Okay, so you might remember that from Key Stage 3. And they believed in the text from Genesis in the Bible that God created and ordered the world. Okay, so this order manifests itself in the concept of the great chain of being. Okay, now if you have a look at that diagram there, can you make any inferences about the kind of order of the great chain of being? What's it saying? Does that picture show you anything? Tell me in the chat if you've got any ideas. Yeah, good, Gracie. Okay, it's a clear hierarchy. Absolutely. We can see the king at the top. Now, it's not massively clear there to you. If we had lots of time and we were in a classroom. Yes, good, Georgia. Absolutely. Oh, good. Lots of people are. Okay. Yeah, good, Sophie. Well done. So you've identified animals and plants in there as well as humans. Absolutely. Good. Well done, Naomi. Absolutely. Okay, good. So we've got this idea of a hierarchy, and we've got the idea that there are things in this hierarchy as well as humans. Okay, so let's just have a look at the next slide so I can explain a little bit more about this to you. So you can see that in this hierarchy at the top, we've got the creator. Okay, so they're above and outside of the system. Okay, so God, effectively. Okay, and he's kind of overseeing everything. He's not in the system. He's not part of the hierarchy. He's created the hierarchy. Okay. So then we've got angelic beings. We've got humans in 3 estates. Okay. So human kings, monarchs, lords, and commoners. Okay. And that is a clear hierarchy, and we're familiar with that from the kind of feudal system that we've been looking at. Animals in 2 tiers. Okay, so you've got animals that are more important than other animals. I'm not getting into that. Plants, and then at the bottom we've got minerals and inanimate objects. Okay, so everybody behaves according to their status, and everybody has expected roles. Okay, so in 15th century Europe, this is just the accepted way of living and behaving. Okay, so if we move on and we have a look at this idea of the king, now you identified quite a lot of these. These are the kind of things that would be running through a Tudor king's mind. Okay, so he'd be thinking about how he could save the souls of the people. He's got a religious function. Okay, he's thinking about how he could maintain law and order. He'd be thinking about the people directly below him in that great chain of being. What do I do if my nobles are too threatening? They might be trying to usurp my power. What am I going to do about that? How can I raise money? They've got a fiscal function, these monarchs. Okay, so they're actually responsible for finance. How can I stop England being invaded? How can I secure the succession? Because I need to make sure there's a king or queen after me that's going to do exactly the same thing as I'm doing. Okay, how can I make sure that I stay on the throne? How am I going to persuade people that I am the king? Now, remember, it's really easy for us to accept that our queen is the queen because we see her on the telly. She gets around the country a lot, so lots of people see her. She's on Twitter, the works. She's literally, Instagramming every day. I'm sure the queen's not, but somebody is on her behalf. Okay, and it's really, really easy for us to believe she is the queen, to believe she's in charge. Okay. But in Tudor England, there's no mass communication, is there? Okay, people have no idea that the king is the king, particularly, unless you're throwing it in their face, and you've got to do that in a particular way. Who can the king trust to give him advice? Okay, so there's loads of things that he's got to take into consideration, and things that our monarch doesn't have to. They might be, Georgia, but there wouldn't be so much currency because people, like common people, would tend to barter with things, and they'd literally like, I'll have I'll swap 6 eggs for 3 bags of flour or something like that. They wouldn't use money in quite the same way. So they wouldn't even see their face in quite the same way that we do. Okay. So that's those kingly questions. Now let's have a look then at the role of a monarch here. Okay. So it says, despite having ultimate power in a realm like England, English kings had to juggle expectations and the limitations placed upon them. Okay, so they're not all powerful, right? There are things that limit their power. Power could be used, okay? So they're obviously in charge, right? They can use that power, but they've got to take these things into consideration. The monarch had to follow the customs of the country and the church, okay? Remember, 15th century Europeans are Catholic. The Catholic Church is run from Rome, not England, okay? They've got to take that into consideration. Therefore, they had to take counsel from learned men to ensure this, okay? So they had advisors in their ear holes telling them what they should or should not do. They also needed to be able to pass laws and raise taxes, and it had to be approved by Parliament too. So that's another hurdle. It's not just like, here we go, we're doing this today, ladies and gents, okay? It's actually, I've got to convince Parliament that this is the right course. The monarch should be fair and ensure English justice was upheld by establishing courts across the realm. All ordinary expenses of government had to be paid from their own income, so they had to be able to finance themselves, okay? And 15th century monarchs had to rely on subject support when they declared war, because there was no what we call standing army, okay? So in our country today, we have an army that is there all the time, no matter what. Whether there's a war, whether there's not a war, they're there all the time. That's their everyday job. They're called a standing army, okay? In the 15th century, there was no standing army, okay? And so that meant that they had to make sure they could recruit support from the common people, okay? So they had to be popular to an extent so that people would want to fight for them. Yes, good. Yeah, interesting point, Ethan. Right, okay. Now, I'm coming back to the Tudors here, okay, or the beginning of the Tudor dynasty, okay? And we're getting to a point where we need to have a look at the term bastard feudalism, okay? And if you haven't read that, they'd be like, oh, can I read that? Can I read that? Just to say the word bastard, okay? So bastard feudalism is the idea of upsetting the great chain of being, okay? So we've looked at that great chain of being, okay? Kings and queens want to create stability. They want to keep that order, okay? Upsetting the great chain of being is not a good thing, okay? So let's have a look and see what happens. So the changing relationship between the crown and the nobility was one of the main reasons that led to the War of the Roses. The feudal system, so if you've done the Normans, you are familiar with this. The feudal system meant that the king ultimately held all landed property, which was granted to tenants with formal responsibility. So if you think about it, William gives land and therefore power and therefore responsibility to his barons. Okay, that is how it works in the feudal system. Okay, but bastard feudal system began to take over. And this was a contract system that was based on annuities, which are annual payments, or indentures, which were split contracts. Okay, so this is where you're basically saying, well, we're not too bothered about the land anymore, but we really want the money. Okay, this allowed overmighty subjects to rise up and challenge the king, as they could build an affinity, which was like a group of men, a following of men, that gave them influence in politics and society. Okay, they could also raise an army very quickly. So we've got kind of the nobility over mighty subjects almost becoming a little bit more popular than the king themselves. Okay, through this idea of bastard feudalism, where they would kind of split up their landed estates for money, for political gain through contracts and things like that. Okay, and it meant that they basically could recruit their own armies. Now, if they can recruit their own armies, who can they challenge? If the nobility can recruit their own armies, who could they challenge? Good, well done, Eloise. The monarch, absolutely. Okay, so let's have a look and see what happens in terms of this Tudor dynasty. So what happens when a monarch doesn't uphold people's expectations? Okay, well, if they don't, if they're not popular enough, if they haven't managed, if they haven't managed to fulfill all those kingly duties that we've talked about so far, then it's going to lead to an uprising, usurpation. Okay, and this is the idea of taking power illegally or by force. Okay, now we have to look back to the monarch Henry V for this. Okay, so Henry V had been a really successful monarch, but he died in his late 20s, and he left a son and heir, Henry VI, who was a Lancastrian. Okay, and if you know anything about the Wars of the Roses, and you'll definitely find out, you'll know that that red rose is the symbol of the Lancastrian dynasty. Okay, he left a son who was called Henry VI, but he was in his minority. Does anyone know what that means? Yeah, good. He was underage. He wasn't really old enough to be the monarch yet. Okay, and because of this, by the time he actually, that's right, Caitlin, well done. The white rose is for York. Because of this, by the time he was in his majority, when he was really old enough to rule by himself and not rely on advisors, he was actually quite weak-willed. Okay, he actually wasn't a very good fit for a king because people had been doing it for him. So it meant that his wife, a lady called Margaret of Anjou, and the nobles in his court were trying to fill the gaps in what he couldn't do. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that monarchs are always monarchs, but their kingly duties might not always be fulfilled to the same degree. Okay, so this meant then that the French defeated the English, and that brought the 100 Years' War to an end. Okay, so this was a war that went on for more than 100 years between the French and the English, and eventually the French won because Henry VI really wasn't a very good king. Okay, Henry VI began to suffer from a mental illness, which was catatonic schizophrenia. Okay, and this allowed the development of a rivalry between Margaret, his wife, and Richard, the Duke of York. Okay, so this is another house. So Margaret, part of the Lancastrian household, and Richard was part of the Yorkist household. Okay, and this sparked something known as the War of the Roses. Okay, so this leads me on to saying that you are going to find out far more about the Wars of the Roses and how they then led to Henry VII becoming the first Tudor king, okay, for your Tudor transition task. So what you will need to do at the end of this session is go to Files on Teams, or you can get this from the website if it's easier to do that. Go to Files in this team and download the History Sixth Form Transition Task booklet. And in that booklet, you will find a number of tasks that I would do in chronological order. I would just do them in chronological order because they will make more sense to you like that, okay? And there are some compulsory tasks to do, mostly on the Wars of the Roses, to prepare you for the Tudors unit. When you have completed those tasks, can you complete the Microsoft Forms quiz that's linked there? It's also linked in your booklet, so don't worry about not having the link. So just click on the link, complete that quiz, and then we will know that you have done that task, okay? In that booklet, towards the back, there are also some optional independent learning tasks. So if you're thinking, actually, I'd really like to engage with this subject more, there are some recommendations for historical fiction to read, for some films and TV series to watch, some places to visit, because hopefully restrictions are lifting a little bit and hopefully you'll be able to get out places. Some things to get you organised, some things to get you thinking. They're optional, okay? So, but please have a look at them, and at least you can think about engaging with those tasks, okay? So that's the Tudors. Now, I said that this course was made up of 3 different units. So the Tudors was the first exam unit, Russia was the second exam unit. So this is the bit that we're going to move on to now. So this is component 2N, if you're studying AQA like us, okay? and it's called Revolution and Dictatorship, Russia 1917 to 1953. Okay, and it is in, just like the Tudors, it's in two parts, and you'll do part 1 in year 12 and part 2 in year 13. Okay, and part 1 is about the Russian Revolution and the rise of Stalin. So it's 1917 to 1929. Okay, you will notice that there is far less history to learn in this course than the Tudors course, because this is the depth study. This means you need to know about a much shorter period of history, but you need to know it in more detail. So we don't have those thematic questions that the Tudors paper was asking. Okay, we're looking at very specific events, and we're looking at the details behind those very specific events. Okay, so in that first part 1, you're going to learn about the fact that, and we will look at this in a second, that Russia had been ruled by kings. They weren't called kings, they were called czars. Okay, Russia had been ruled by czars for centuries, and those czars actually weren't doing a brilliant job by the time we get to 1917. And there were 2 revolutions in 1917, one in February, March. The Russians have a different calendar to the calendar that we operate on in 1917. So you'll learn about this a bit more in September, but February, March revolution, and a second revolution in October, November 1917. Okay, so the first revolution ended the Tsar's reign, okay, and brought in a kind of semi-democratic government for the first time, known as the provisional government. The second revolution said this provisional government is not doing a good enough job. A revolutionary called Lenin, okay, and you probably will have heard of him, decided that he could do a far better job if he made Russia into a communist country, and he led a communist revolution, okay, to take over the country at that point. So in that first part of the course, we look at those revolutions, but we also look at how the communists, or the Bolsheviks they were known as, came to be able to rule Russia. And then towards the end of that time period, Lenin died after a series of strokes, and there was a power struggle for the leadership in the Bolshevik party. And Stalin, and you can see him on the screen there, he eventually gains the position of leader of the Communist Party. We'll investigate how that happens. So that's in part 1. Part 2 is looking at Stalin's dictatorship. So it's looking at the period from 1929 to 1953. And this is a little bit more thematic. So it looks at the idea of Stalin and the economy, and Stalin and politics, society, and terror, because one of the ways he keeps control really is through a kind of terrorist movement. Okay. And the final part to that is about foreign policy. And if you look at the date range there, you will recognize that this encompasses World War II. The Russians call it the Great Patriotic War. And it also encompasses the Cold War, the beginnings of the Cold War. So if you were at Shenley and you did GCSE history with us, the bit of the Cold War that we do up to 1953, you've already studied, but you'll come back to it and look at it in a little bit more detail at the end of 1953. Okay, so at the end of year 13 even. Right, so let's move on then, and let's just give you a bit of a taster in this Russian course. Okay, I think we've got about 10 minutes. We've definitely got time to do this. So this is interesting because we've been talking so far today about a monarch, okay, or different monarchs and their kingly duties, and the way that society was structured with the great chain of being in 15th century Europe. And I'm going to say this is 1900s Russia. What do you notice? What do you notice about how Russia was structured in the early 1900s? And I put a question up there as well, just trying to get you to think about who different groups might be that are represented in that cartoon. Right, okay, this is good. Right, so lovely. Okay, lots of good comments here. So yes, we've clearly got a hierarchy again, haven't we? It's very similar to the great chain of being. does kind of have a religious aspect, but it doesn't have that creator aspect, does it? Okay, so that's kind of how humanity's moved on at this point. Absolutely. You definitely got the Tsar at the top. Absolutely. Okay. You've got, yes, good. Right, Eloise, lovely. We've got a good identification here. So yeah, we've got the Tsar, we've got the Duma, parliaments, the government. Absolutely. We've got the church, we've got soldiers, we've got nobles, and we've got peasants. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you've got a really, really, really clear hierarchy there. Okay, so we can say then, well, what can we say? What does it suggest about the way that Russia was governed in the early 1900s? What does it suggest? Is it very democratic, for example? That's interesting, Gracie. Yeah, fear and wealth ruled, absolutely. Yeah, money really matters here, doesn't it? Okay, in terms of kind of wealth and status, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, good. Right, lovely, Eloise. So yes, it is very feudal. It looks almost exactly like the feudal system that you're familiar with. It's undemocratic. Yeah, good, and especially compared to other Western nations at the time. Yeah. Now, 1900, if you compare it, in Britain, you've got real active parliamentary democracy. Okay, you do have a Queen Victoria, just-ish. Okay, but she is absolutely a constitutional monarch. She's there really as a figurehead and not much more. Okay, and you've got a very active parliament. In terms of the electorate, you've got no women voting, but you have got all men voting. Okay, so this is kind of, yeah, this is very backward in comparison, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, not very democratic at all. Now let's move on and think about, well, if it's not democratic, what's the word that describes it? And the word that I think describes it is autocracy or autocratic. Has anyone got any ideas what that might mean? Brilliant, Alessandro. Yeah, good. The ruler has complete power, one person having the most power. Yep, absolutely. Absolute power. Okay, yes. Good definitions. Let's have a look at a kind of dictionary definition. So the head of state, in this case the Tsar, has absolute power. Okay, so this could be a monarch or it could be an individual who sees power. It doesn't have to be a king or a queen. It doesn't have to be a monarch, but sometimes it is. Who's the autocratic monarch that we studied at GCSE? If I say Germany. Yeah, good, absolutely. Yeah, Wilhelm II. Okay, so we looked at Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm II, okay, is the cousin of the Russian Tsar. Okay, so they're both related to Queen Victoria. They're also related to the King of England at this time as well. Okay, so you know, got lots of European monarchies going on. The ruler then in an absolute monarchy or an autocracy can interfere in the economic, political, and social system of the country without limitation. Okay, so when we looked at Germany, if you remember, the Kaiser was influencing everything. Okay, so even though they had a parliamentary system going on, the Kaiser really was telling Parliament what it could and what it couldn't debate, and he could dismiss Parliament if he wanted to. Very, very similar in Russia. Okay, so let's have a look at this Tsar. Okay, so the Tsar that we're interested in, we will begin our course with in September, is Tsar Nicholas II. Okay, and he was the eldest son of Tsar Alexander III. He came to the throne when his father died in 1894. He married a German princess, okay, Alexandra, and she was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Alexandra was a strong believer in the autocratic power of the Tsar and urged him to resist reform. Okay, so quite often the Tsar was being told, Russia needs to develop. You need to change the way you rule. And actually, he pretty much ignored that because he had Alexandra in his ear telling him that he was the Tsar and he should be able to do what he wanted to, divine right of kings. So we're coming back to that idea, okay? And he shouldn't have to change anything if he didn't want to do that. So Nicholas actually really wasn't very capable. He really wasn't a very capable person, okay? If we go back to the idea of Henry VI not being very capable, very similar, okay? He was really indecisive. He had this firm belief in the divine right of kings, and he didn't want to westernize Russia, okay? He made a speech in January 1895 that said that he thought the dreams of those who wanted democracy were senseless dreams, okay? And he certainly wasn't going to go down that route, okay? Now, a Bolshevik, Leon Trotsky, okay, he kind of ruled alongside Lenin, later remarks, Nicholas inherited from his ancestors not only a giant empire, but also a revolution. And they didn't bequeath him one quality that would have made him capable of governing an empire or even a country. What does that mean? What do you think Trotsky's saying about Nicholas II there? Does he think he's fit to rule Russia? Yeah, absolutely, Sophie. He thought he was incompetent. Absolutely. Okay. He's also saying the revolution wasn't entirely his fault. Who does he blame the Russian Revolution on? Nicholas inherited from his ancestors. Yeah, the former Tsars. Yeah, absolutely. So the problems that led to the Russian Revolution, largely economic problems, okay, social problems, had been there for centuries, and Tsars hadn't modernized, okay? So Nicholas just unfortunately inherited this huge problem he was never going to be able to solve. Didn't really help. It's a little bit stupid too. Okay, so let's have a little look then at our last slide here on Russia, okay? And I just want you to think about everything you've learned today, okay? It has been a whistle-stop tour. In what ways was Nicholas II similar to a 15th century or a Tudor monarch? What would you say? How was he similar? Didn't want to change things. He was incompetent, yes, but he was sure he should lead. So why was he so sure he should lead? Good. The belief in the divine right of kings. Wonderful. Well done, ladies. Okay. What about his kind of wider functions and the wider functions of 15th century monarchs? Yeah, quite similar, Naomi. Absolutely. So he had to lead kind of politically because he's got to tell the government what to do politically, economically, or he's responsible for the economy as well. He's got to have this social function. He's got a religious function. Okay, it's really, really similar to a 15th century monarch. Yes, well done, Eloise. Good observation. They absolutely were both heavily influenced by their wives. Well done. Okay, was he different in any way? Yeah, okay. So yeah, he did have one wife. Yeah. Some 15th century monarchs had far more, absolutely. Some just had the one. I suppose he was threatened by a huge political change, wasn't he? Whereas monarchs in the past were threatened by somebody else who wanted to be the monarch. Okay, so that's maybe a difference there. Okay, let's move on then. So, like I said earlier on about the Tudors, you also have some transition tasks to get you ready for Russia. You have separate tasks because in September you will have separate teachers. So it's almost like doing two subjects. Okay. So again, you'll need to download the booklet. It's all in the same booklet, so it's all in one place for you. Okay. And work through the compulsory transition tasks for the Russia unit. They are very self-explanatory, just like the Tudors ones. Okay, so really self-explanatory. When you've done those tasks, if you click on that link, okay, so it's there, it's also in the booklet. Click on that link and complete the Microsoft Forms quiz. That means we will know that you've done that task, and that's brilliant. Okay, and again, you've got some independent learning options as well. So you've got things to watch, things to listen to, things to read, things to help you get organized. So you can do as much or as little of that as you'd like to do. Okay. Another thing that we would like you to do just to get ready for September is to think about buying some textbooks. Okay. Now, some of you will be unsure about coming to Shenley at the moment. That's fine. Okay. In which case, I wouldn't buy any textbooks. Some of you will be unsure about whether you want to do history at the moment. That's fine. In which case, I wouldn't buy any textbooks. Okay. But some of you will be really sure you want to come to Shenley and we're really sure you want to do history. And if you are, then I would start buying these books. Okay. You will need all three of these books in September. Okay. And all three of these books will be needed all the way through to the end of year 13. So you'll need them for 2 years. They are quite pricey. Okay. So if you think that you might be in receipt of some financial support from the school, then that's something you can discuss with the sixth form office in September and they can help you to buy these books. Okay. But we will never ask you to buy any other books. Okay. So it's just these. Okay. This is the only outlay that we will be asking you financially to provide for the whole of your course. Okay. So you've got a book on the Tudors there, you've got a book on Russia there, and you've got a book that accompanies your coursework. You'll notice that it's I think it's an edXL book when you get it up on Amazon. Okay, and that's fine. Okay, I know we're studying AQA. Do not worry about that. It just will help you with your coursework. Okay, it will help you to follow a structure with your coursework. Right, I've got some questions here. So, Eloise, how's the Russia exam structured? Okay, good question. So, again, it's a 2.5-hour exam. This time, instead of interpretations, you will have a source question, okay? And you will have 2 essay questions. So, it's quite similar, except you're examined on sources rather than interpretations, okay? Naomi says, do we need to send the booklet? No, just bring your booklet with you in September, okay? So I think I've got one more slide that, in fact, I've got a little bit here. Oh, yeah. So once you have either had a look at those textbooks and bought them or decided not to buy them yet, there is also just one more survey to do. Okay, so that means there's 3 Microsoft forms we'd like you to fill in. One about the Tudors, one about Russia, and one general one, okay, which really won't take you very long at all. Okay, so that's all explained in your booklet. And then finally, great question, Naomi. Okay. The deadline for the completion of all the compulsory tasks, so that's the Russia, the Tudors, and the three Microsoft Forms quizzes, is Friday, the 24th of September. Now, you'll be well into year 12 by then. Okay. I would definitely try and get this done by the very beginning of September. And what I'd really like you to do is to bring all your booklet work and any notes you might have and things like that to your very first history lesson. Now, that might be on your first day, okay? So I would have it ready for your first day if you possibly can, okay? If you can't, if you make late decisions, things like that, that's no worries, okay? You've got till Friday the 24th of September, but we will be using that transition work on the Wars of the Roses and on Nicholas II, okay? in our very first lessons. So the more prepared you can be, the better. Okay, right. I've got 2 minutes, 1 minute left. Has anybody got any questions they would like to ask me? Things that they think I haven't covered. If you'd like to, stick them in the chat for me. Yeah, you can bring in laptops if you want to. Sometimes I will insist on things being handwritten, especially if you're doing like a timed essay or something, because obviously in an exam, you need to be able to write with handwriting to time. But if you want to do notes, that's fine. On your laptop, you can find a comfortable way of working in year 12. You take them, yes, you take Russia and the Tudors at the same time, not like one per term. So you'll have a Russia lesson a week and a Tudors lesson a week. Okay. Are there any other questions? Right. Brilliant. Okay, so it is very nearly 12 o'clock. So I think you are heading off to your next session. My alarm's going off to tell me that I'm starting my next session. Okay, so have a really good day. Thank you very much for coming. And I really look forward to seeing some of you in September. See you later. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.